Imagine a place so remote that even the wind seems to carry secrets from another time. High in the Arctic Circle, where the sun barely rises in winter and the aurora dances like restless spirits, stands the skeletal remains of what was once a vital link in NATO's Cold War defences. Site Echo 7, officially known during its active years as part of the ACE High Communications Network, was a tropospheric scatter station perched on a windswept ridge in northern Norway. Built in the late 1960s, its massive paired dish antennas beamed encrypted signals across hundreds of miles, bouncing them off the upper atmosphere to connect Allied command centres from the Norwegian fjords to the Mediterranean. It was Cold War engineering at its most austere. Concrete barracks, diesel generators, a small ops building, and those towering dishes that looked like giant ears listening for the end of the world. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the site was mothballed. The antennas rusted, the barracks emptied, and nature began reclaiming what man had built. For decades, it sat silent, officially abandoned, unofficially forgotten, until 2024. With Russian activity increasing in the high north, submarine patrols, long-range bombers probing NATO airspace, and hybrid threats along the border, Allied command decided some of these old sites needed eyes on them again, not for reactivation, but to prevent sabotage, vandalism, or worse. Small security details were dispatched, multinational NATO troops, mostly from Norway, the UK, and the US, rotating in for 30-day stints to guard the perimeter, monitor for intrusions, and keep the site from becoming a staging ground for anyone who didn't belong. What they expected: boredom, frostbite, and maybe the occasional curious reindeer. What they got was something else. These are their stories, told in their own words, from men and women who swore oaths to defend the realm of the living, only to encounter something that didn't answer to any flag. This is Wartime Stories. Before we begin, a quick word from our sponsor. Chapter 1. Arrival and the First Watch. My name is Sergeant Lars Hagen, Norwegian Army Telemark Battalion. I arrived at Echo 7 on November 12th, 2024, leading a 12-man security detachment drawn from Norway, the United Kingdom, and the United States. The mission briefing in Bodø had been clinical. Reactivate perimeter security at the decommissioned troposcatter station. Conduct twice daily patrols. Log all movement within the 5-kilometer exclusion zone. Report intrusions or anomalies through secure SATCOM. No excavation, no tampering with legacy equipment, no curiosity about the classified remnants still bolted to the concrete. Simply presence, a deterrent footprint in a region where Russian reconnaissance flights had increased 37% in the preceding 18 months. The approach was punishing. We left the E6 in 6 up-armoured Mercedes G-wagons fitted with snow chains and thermal imaging pods. Winds gusted to 60 knots across the Finnmark Plateau, driving horizontal snow that reduced visibility to 15 metres. Navigation relied on GPS overlays and dead reckoning. The final 8 kilometres climbed a single-track gravel road, now buried under fresh powder. When we crested the ridge at 14:30 hours, the station appeared suddenly through the whiteout. 2 enormous paired parabolic dishes, each 30 metres across, frozen mid-tilt like listening sentinels, abandoned by their operators decades earlier. Ice had accreted along every structural member, turning the steel lattice into translucent sculpture. Below them squatted the main barracks block, a single-story reinforced concrete rectangle. windows boarded with plywood sheets. The only fresh addition, the NATO standard high-security padlocks we had brought ourselves. We dismounted and cleared the building using standard four-man stack procedures. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of old diesel fuel, mildew, and something faintly metallic. Flashlights swept across rows of metal bunks still bolted to the floor. Lockers rusted shut. A galley kitchen lined with unopened tins bearing 1987 expiration dates. Fluorescent tubes flickered to life when we restarted the primary 50-kilowatt generator. The backup diesel coughed online moments later. Red emergency lighting bathed the corridors in a dull crimson glow. We found no signs of recent entry, no bootprints in the dust, no disturbed padlocks, no graffiti. Only the slow settling of 35 years of silence. By 1900, we had established a basic command post in the old operations room. Desks still held yellowed log sheets, rotary dial telephones, and a troposcatter control panel whose vacuum tubes had long since gone dark. Corporal Thomas Davies, 3rd Battalion Parachute Regiment, and I drew the first graveyard shift. 0200 to 0600. And we positioned ourselves at the south-facing observation window with tripods supporting Safran Jim LR thermal binoculars and a pair of suppressed L85A3 rifles. Outside, the wind howled around the dish array, making the entire structure groan like a living thing. At 0347, the thermal picked it up. A single humanoid heat signature, approximately 1.8 meters tall, moving parallel to the outer chain-link fence at the 11 o'clock position, roughly 50 meters from our vantage. The figure advanced in a measured stride, then halted abruptly. No exhaust plume, no vehicle tracks trailing behind it in the fresh accumulation. Just the shape, brighter than ambient snow, standing motionless. "Contact, 11 o'clock, 50 meters," Davies whispered, voice tight. Humanoid. No thermal masking. I confirmed through my own optic. The signature was crisp, consistent with an unprotected human body in -28 Celsius, yet it carried no pack, no weapon silhouette, no telltale movement of breath condensing in the air. I keyed the external loudspeaker mounted above the main entrance. "This is NATO Security Detachment Echo 7. Identify yourself and state your purpose. You are trespassing on restricted military property." Static answered, then silence. The figure remained frozen. 30 seconds passed. Then the wind veered, carrying a new sound, a slow, deliberate tapping. Metal on metal. Not from outside, from somewhere behind us, deep inside the barracks corridor. We both spun, weapons up. The hallway stretched empty under the red lights. Concrete floor, closed doors, no shadows out of place. The tapping ceased the instant we turned. When we looked back through the window, the heat signature had vanished. No disturbance in the snow, no footprints leading away or toward the fence. Nothing. Davies exhaled sharply, the plume of his breath fogging the glass. "Arctic mirage," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Or a fox on its hind legs. They do that sometimes." I didn't answer. My pulse still hammered against my collar. We remained at alert until 0600, sweeping the perimeter visually every 90 seconds. No further contacts. When the relief team arrived, we debriefed quietly over coffee in the galley. No one laughed. No one suggested we had imagined it. Later that morning, I walked the fence line myself. The snow was pristine, except for our own patrol tracks. At the spot where the figure had stood, I crouched and examined the surface. No compression, no scuff, no sign anything heavier than a shadow had rested there. Yet the memory of that tapping lingered, rhythmic, patient, as though something inside the walls had been counting our heartbeats. We secured the site and continued the rotation. But from that first watch onward, none of us ever fully relaxed inside those barracks again. The building felt occupied long before we arrived, and whatever shared the space with us was in no hurry to introduce itself. Chapter 2. The Barracks Whisper. Private First Class Maria Cortez, United States Army 10th Mountain Division. I deployed to Echo 7 on January 8, 2025, as part of the second 30-day rotation. By then, the initial Norwegian-led team had already rotated out, leaving behind a handover brief that was shorter than it should have been. They mentioned the first night heat signature and the tapping sound, chalked both up to environmental factors and fatigue, but their eyes stayed too long on the barracks block when they said it. We were 12 again, mixed nationalities, same mission. Maintain presence, deter intrusion, document anything out of the ordinary. The site looked unchanged from the photos in the brief. Dishes still iced over. Perimeter fence sagging slightly under fresh snow load. The concrete barracks hunkered low against the ridge like it was trying to disappear into the mountain. We spent the first day inventorying and fortifying. The generators ran smoothly after minor maintenance. We installed additional motion sensors along the approach road and wired extra low-light cameras in the main corridors. The barracks interior felt colder inside than the -30 outside. The walls were thick concrete, painted institutional green decades ago, now flaking in long strips. Bunks were double-stacked, mattresses long gone, replaced by our issue sleeping bags. The galley still held those ancient canned goods, some labels in Norwegian, others in faded English. We joked about them being emergency rations for the next World War, but no one actually opened one. Activity began the second night. I was billeted in the East Wing, 4 bunks to a room, sharing with 2 British riflemen and a Danish corporal. Lights out was 2,300. Red emergency strips stayed on in the hallways. Around 02:15, I woke to footsteps. Heavy, deliberate boot falls on the concrete corridor outside our door. Not hurried, not stealthy, just walking, all the way a sentry might pace during a long watch. The sound came from the far end of the block, grew louder as it approached, then stopped directly outside our room. I sat up slowly, hand on the M4 slung beside my bag. The others were still breathing evenly, sleeping through it. The footsteps paused for perhaps 10 seconds, then resumed, moving away toward the ops room at the opposite end. I eased the door open a crack. Empty hallway, red light pooling on bare floor. No shadows, no dust disturbed. I reported it at morning stand to. Sergeant Hale, the detachment NCO, listened without interrupting, then ordered a full building sweep. And we found nothing. No tracks in the accumulated dust on the floor, no signs of forced entry, no footprints in the snow outside the fire doors. The external cameras showed only blowing snow and the occasional Arctic hair crossing the frame. The footsteps returned every night after that, always between 0200 and 0400, always the same measured cadence. Sometimes they paused longer outside one door or another, as though listening. We began sleeping in shifts. One man on watch inside each bunkroom. It didn't help. On the night of January 14th, I pulled solo watch in my room while the others patrolled the outer perimeter. The generator was running steady. The lights were dimmed to conserve fuel. I sat on the lower bunk with my rifle across my lap. NVGs flipped up, listening. At 0312, the footsteps started again. Farther away this time, almost at the west end near the old shower block. They approached steadily, growing louder with each step. When they reached my door, they stopped. Then came the voice. Low, male, speaking Norwegian with an old-fashioned inflection, the kind you hear in archival recordings from the 60s. The words were clear despite the distortion, as though spoken through a throat full of water. Du skal ikke være her. You shouldn't be here. My skin went cold. I brought the rifle up, safety off, finger indexed along the frame. The door was locked from the inside. The deadbolt was engaged. I waited. No knock. No rattle of the handle. Just silence after the words. I keyed my personal radio, voice barely above a whisper. This is Cortez. Auditory contact, East Wing, Room 4. Male voice, Norwegian. You shouldn't be here. Checking now. I unlocked the door, swept the hallway left and right. Empty. The red lights hummed overhead. No one in sight. I moved to the nearest camera junction box and pulled the feed on my tablet. The corridor recording showed nothing. No figure, no movement. But when I scrubbed back to 0312, the audio track captured it perfectly. The footsteps halting. Then the voice, unmistakable and calm. We played the clip for the whole detachment at 0700. No one spoke for a long minute. Sergeant Hale finally said, "Log it, flag it for hire, no speculation in the report." But we all knew what we had heard. That afternoon, during a routine locker inspection, Corporal Patel found something in one of the old wall-mounted storage units that had been welded shut since decommissioning. Someone, probably during the initial clear, had pried it open. Inside, behind a rusted first aid kit, was a single black and white photograph. A young Norwegian soldier, early 20s, and standing outside one of the dish arrays. Date stamp on the back, 14th of October, 1968. He was smiling, but his eyes looked tired. Handwritten in blue ink on the reverse, in careful block letters. De kommer tilbake når mørket faller. They come back when darkness falls. We photographed it, logged it, sealed it in an evidence bag. No one wanted to touch it for long. That night the footsteps were louder, closer together, as though whatever made them had decided to stop pretending distance. And every time they paused outside a door, I waited for the voice again. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Snow Corporal. James Reynolds, Royal Marines, 45, Commando. I arrived at Echo 7 on February 3rd, 2025, attached to the 3rd rotation. The handover from the previous detachment was brisk and clipped. Standard procedure, updated patrol routes, our generator maintenance logs, and one quiet line from their sergeant major. Keep the floods on after dark if you can. Things quiet down when it's bright. He didn't elaborate. We didn't ask. We were there to do the job, not chase ghost stories. The site felt heavier than the photos suggested. Snow had drifted against the barracks walls up to the windowsills, forcing us to shovel access paths twice a day. The dish arrays stood motionless now, motors disconnected years ago, but the wind still found ways to make the lattice sing. High metallic notes that carried for kilometres. We ran full perimeter illumination whenever practical. 4 1,000-watt sodium floods mounted on poles at the corners of the fence line, wired to motion sensors and manual overrides. The brief said energy conservation wasn't the priority. Visibility was. Activity followed a pattern we mapped within the first week. Nothing happened under direct light. The moment a bulb failed, a generator cycled for refueling, or the aurora borealis flared bright enough to wash out the floods, the perimeter came alive. Not with intruders in the conventional sense, with shapes. On the night of February 12th, I drew out a patrol with Lance Corporal Amit Patel, 2-man foot patrol standard loadout, SA-80 rifles with EQ-15 IR illuminators, PVS 14 night vision monoculars, and handheld thermal imagers. We moved clockwise along the inner fence, boots crunching through crusty snow, breath fogging in the -32 air. The aurora was active, green curtains shifting overhead, bright enough to cast faint shadows on the ground. We kept the floods on low power to preserve night adaptation. Halfway between Tower 3 and the old generator shed, about 200 metres from the barracks, Patel stopped mid-stride. "Smell that?" I inhaled. Beneath the clean bite of snow came something rotten. Warm decay, like meat left too long in a tent. Not possible in this cold. We both raised weapons, scanning sectors. Then the shapes appeared. They moved between the snowdrifts 50 metres out, just beyond the fence. Tall, easily 2.5 metres, thin as birch saplings, outlines fluid in a way no human silhouette ever is. Limbs too long, joints bending at unnatural angles. They drifted rather than walked, bodies leaning into the wind without resistance. No heat signature on thermal, no tracks breaking the fresh powder behind them. Just forms cutting through the snowfall like smoke given purpose. Patel whispered. 3 contacts. Bearing 045. Non-standard movement. I keyed the radio. Control Reynolds. Visual on multiple unknowns outside East Fence. No thermal, no tracks. Request permission to challenge. Granted, came the reply from the OPS room, loud and clear. Record everything. I switched to the bullhorn clipped to my webbing. This is NATO security, Echo 7. Halt and identify. You are approaching a restricted military installation. Stop movement immediately. The shapes froze, all 3, perfectly still. Then the center one rotated its head farther than any neck should allow toward us. No features visible against the aurora backlight. Just a smooth void where a face should have been. Patel's voice cracked. Engaging. Hold. My thumb rested on the safety. Heart rate hammered at 140. We waited. 10 seconds. 20. And then the shapes dissolved. Not retreated. Dissolved. Edges fraying into wisps, bodies collapsing inward like ink dropped in water, gone in under 3 seconds. The rotten smell faded with them. We swept the area with IR and white light. Nothing. No casings if we'd fired, no impressions in the snow. We returned to the barracks at double time, reported the contact, and reviewed bodycam footage. The video showed only empty drifts and auroral glare. No figures, no movement beyond wind-driven snow. But our audio captured our own challenge, our breathing, and, faintly beneath it all, a low, wet rustle, like canvas tearing slowly. That night the tapping returned, but different. Not fingernails on metal anymore. Something heavier, inside the walls. Slow, deliberate knocks, travelling along the concrete from the east wing to the west, are pausing at each bunkroom door before moving on. We stayed up in full kit, lights blazing, waiting for it to reach us. When it did, outside my room, the knocks stopped for almost a minute. Then a single deep thud against the interior wall, hard enough to rattle the bunk frame. No one spoke. We didn't need to. Whatever was in the barracks had heard the shots we never fired outside. And it was answering. The next morning we doubled the flood wattage and ran diesel non-stop. Command-approved emergency resupply for fuel. But we all knew the light was only buying time. The shapes didn't need footprints. They didn't need heat. They moved when the dark allowed it, and they waited when it didn't. From then on, every patrol felt like walking through someone else's memory of the place. The mountain remembered the men who vanished in 71, and now it was measuring us against them. One night soon, I thought, the lights would fail for good, and when they did, the shadows wouldn't just watch. They'd come closer. Chapter 4. The Old Ops Room. Lieutenant Anna Sørensen, Norwegian Armed Forces, serving as detachment commander for the March 2025 rotation at Echo 7. I took command on March 1st, after the Royal Marines handed over the site. By then, the detachment had shrunk to 10 effectives, 2 men medically evacuated for frostbite complications, 1 repatriated after a breakdown that required psychiatric evaluation. The handover brief was terse. Updated fuel consumption rates, a list of failed motion sensors, and a single handwritten note taped to the ops room door. Lights stay on. Always. I had read the declassified portions of the station's history file before deployment. Echo 7 had been more than a troposcatter relay. During the height of the Cold War, it served as a forward listening post, intercepting Soviet signals bounced off the ionosphere. But one incident stood out in the redacted logs. October 1971. A severe polar low-pressure system isolated the station for 72 hours. When the relief convoy finally broke through the drifts, they found the barracks empty. 8 crew members gone. No blood, no struggle marks, no emergency signals sent. Coffee cups still warm on the table. Radios tuned to dead frequencies. The official conclusion, exposure during an unauthorized excursion, possible mass desertion under stress, eventual hypothermia, was accepted without enthusiasm. Old-timers in the Norwegian signals branch still called it the night the mountain took them. I decided to pull the remaining classified annex myself. Not to satisfy curiosity, but because Command had authorized limited review for operational context. The safe in the ops room, still functional after all these years, contained one slim folder stamped NATO secret //no fawn. Inside were photocopies of the original watchlogs from that week, handwritten in faded ballpoint. 23rd of October, 1971. Anomalous returns on the troposcatterscope. Not atmospheric distortion. Multiple contacts. Stationary, then moving in formation toward the dish array. October 24th. Personnel reporting auditory hallucinations. Voices on unused frequencies. Not Russian, not English. Language unidentified. Crew instructed to log but ignore. October 25th. Night Watch claims figures outside dome perimeter. Non-reflective to IR. No heat signature. Floodlights ineffective. Request permission to investigate. Denied. The final entry was scrawled in a different hand. The letters shaky. They are not outside. They are already in. The page ended there, torn jaggedly as though someone had ripped the rest away in haste. I photographed every sheet, sealed the originals back in the safe, and briefed the detachment at evening stand-to. No embellishment, just the facts. We know the history, we stay vigilant, lights on, weapons hot. No solo excursions. Nods all around, but the room felt smaller afterward. That night the power failed. At 23:47, the primary generator stuttered and died. The backup kicked in automatically. But the transfer lagged. 18 minutes of total blackout before the lights flickered back on. 18 minutes in which the aurora outside flared violently, green and violet sheets pulsing across the sky. When illumination returned, every door in the barracks stood open. Every single one. Bunkroom doors, galley, shower block, equipment stores. Even the reinforced steel door to the generator room, which required a key and a manual latch. None of the locks had been tampered with. No pry marks, no forced entry. The doors simply hung ajar, as though someone had walked through and left them that way. We cleared the building room by room, weapons up, tack lights sweeping. Empty corridors, empty bunks. But every sleeping bag had been disturbed. Covers pulled back, pillows dented. See indentations on mattresses, as though bodies had lain there during the blackout. Bodies the exact size and shape of ours. I checked my own rack last. My sleeping bag was unzipped, folded down precisely to the waist. On the pillow lay a single item that had not been there when I left for the ops room earlier. A small brass key, tarnished, stamped with the old Ace High logo. It fit none of the locks we still used. We spent the rest of the night in the ops room, lights at maximum, generators running full load. No one slept. At 04:30 the tapping started again, not the light fingernails of the first weeks, but heavy, deliberate knocks coming from beneath the concrete floor. Slow, rhythmic, like someone, or something, counting seconds until the next blackout. Dawn brought no relief. The aurora faded, but the sky stayed heavy and low. We ran diagnostics on the generators. No fault found, fuel clean, circuits intact. The failure had no mechanical explanation. I logged the incident, attached photos of the open doors and the disturbed bunks, and requested an emergency engineering team. Hire approved, but the soonest they could arrive was 10 days. 10 days of darkness that came earlier every evening. That afternoon I returned to the ops room alone. I sat at the old troposcatter console and powered it up, against standing orders. But I needed to see. The vacuum tubes warmed slowly. The scope lit with green phosphor glow. No signals, just static. Then, unprompted, the needle jumped. A single return appeared, stationary directly beneath the building. No movement, no Doppler shift, just there, watching. I shut it down immediately. From that moment the barracks felt different. Not haunted in the childish sense. Occupied, measured. As though the place had been waiting for new tenants to fill the spaces left by the men who disappeared in 71. And now it was deciding whether we measured up, or whether we too would be taken when the next storm came. Chapter 5. The final patrol sergeant, Major Elias Thorne, British Army, attached to Multinational Detachment Command, Echo 7. I assumed overall responsibility for the site on April 1st, 2025. The last full rotation before the Norwegian Ministry of Defence planned to downgrade security to periodic drone overflights and occasional snap inspections. By then, we were down to 8 effectives. Frostbite had claimed 2 more fingers and a foot between rotations. One rifleman had walked off post at 0400 during a whiteout. leaving his rifle and helmet neatly stacked against the fence. Search parties found nothing but his tracks, ending abruptly 50 meters out. Psych evacs had taken another 3. The rest of us were functional, but the barracks had worn us thin. Sleep came in snatches. Conversations stayed short. We all felt the same thing. The place was deciding how long it would tolerate us. The final patrol was scheduled for midnight on April 15th, full moon reflecting off unbroken snow, turning the ridge into a pale, almost luminous plain. Visibility was exceptional for the Arctic, 8 kilometers under clear sky, aurora subdued to faint green ribbons low on the northern horizon. I led the 4-man team, Corporal Reynolds, still on light duties after the shadow contact, Lance Corporal Patel, Private Cortez, and myself. Just standard dismounted patrol. Suppressed rifles, thermals, NVGs. One man carrying the SATCOM backpack for immediate exfil request if needed. Objective: full circuit of the dish array, visual inspection of the troposcatter domes, then back to barracks for final pack-out before 0600 helo extraction. We moved out at 23:45, single file along the shovelled path, boots muffled by fresh powder. The generators hummed steadily behind us. Every floodlight burned at maximum, bathing the perimeter in harsh yellow. No wind. The silence was absolute, except for our breathing and the faint metallic creak of the dish frames contracting in the cold. Halfway to the array, about 400 meters from the barracks, the antennas began to move. Not wind-driven oscillation, deliberate, slow. The northern pair rotated westward 5 degrees, then stopped. The southern pair followed, tilting upward as though tracking something overhead. Motors had been disconnected in 1992. Gearboxes seized solid decades ago. No power ran to them. Yet they turned with the smooth precision of newly serviced machinery. Reynolds hissed over comms. "Sir, visual on-antenna movement. Both arrays tracking independently." I raised my rifle, thumbed the PEQ laser. Control Thorn, confirming mechanical anomaly at dish array. No external power observed. Stand by. Static answered first. Then a burst. Loud overlapping voices flooding every channel. Not English, not Norwegian. Layers of speech, Old Norse inflections. Something guttural and older still, words piling over each other like multiple transmissions bleeding into the same frequency. The SATCOM crackled with feedback. Our personal radios squealed in unison. The voices cut off as suddenly as they started. We pressed forward, weapons up, spacing tightened. At the base of the northern dish, we stopped. Moonlight silvered the concrete pad. No footprints but ours. No tool marks. The rotation had ceased. The dishes now pointed due north, locked in position. Then the shapes returned. Dozens this time, encircling the perimeter fence at 100-meter intervals. Tall, elongated silhouettes rising from the snow like smoke given form. 2.5 meters. Maybe more. No thermal bloom. No tracks leading to or from their positions. They stood motionless, heads tilted slightly, as though listening to the same silent broadcast we could no longer hear. One detached from the circle and approached the fence directly in front of us. It moved without disturbing the snow, gliding, almost, until it stopped 10 meters short of the chain link. Erased what passed for an arm, long, segmented, ending in something like fingers that weren't quite fingers. The voice came again. Not over radio this time, a clear, calm. A broadcast from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating in the air itself. "Vi venter fortsatt." "We are still waiting," Cortez whispered. "Permission to engage, Sergeant Major." "Negative. Fall back. Slow. No sudden moves." We withdrew in good order, keeping weapons trained on the figure. It didn't pursue. None of them did. They simply watched. Patient, unblinking voids where faces should have been. We reached the barracks at 1:20. I ordered immediate exfil prep, strip personal gear, destroy non-essential logs, torch anything classified that couldn't be carried. The generators would run until the helo arrived. Lights stayed on full. As we loaded the last rucksacks into the G-wagons, I glanced back toward the dish array one final time. The barracks lights, every single bulb, every emergency strip flared suddenly brighter, shifting from white to deep, pulsing red. Silhouettes appeared behind every window, dozens of them. Too many. Far more than our remaining 8. They stood motionless, staring out. Not moving, not waving. Just there. I keyed the SATCOM one last time. Echo 7 to command, site secure. Personnel evacuating now, recommend permanent stand-down. Anomalous activity confirmed, entities present in strength. The reply was immediate. Roger, Echo 7, extraction inbound, do not re-enter structures, acknowledge. We mounted up and rolled down the ridge without looking back. The red glow followed us for the first kilometre, visible even through the rear windows before the road dipped and the site disappeared behind the crest. The helo lifted us out at 05:30. Dawn was still hours away. From the air looking down, the barracks block burned like a coal in the snow. Every window crimson, shapes crowding every pane. We never returned. Command classified the entire detachment's after-action reports. Official line, structural instability. Generator fire hazard. Site abandoned for safety reasons. Unofficial orders. No further rotations. No inquiries. The mountain had waited 54 years for new occupants. It had found us wanting. And it was still waiting. Chapter 6. The last night in the red light private first class. Daniel Kovacs, Hungarian Defence Forces, Special Service Regiment. I was the last rotation. Just me and 3 others. Technically a reduced caretaker detachment. But we all knew what it really was. The quietest possible way to close the site without admitting anything unusual had ever happened. We flew in on April 28th, 2025. The orders were simple and final. 30 days. Secure the facility. Supervise the civilian contractor team that would arrive on day 28 to remove the remaining sensitive equipment. Weld the door shut and leave the site to rot properly this time. After that, Echo 7 would be struck from the active protection roster. No more boots on the ground, no more NATO flag, just concrete, rust and snow. The first 24 days were almost boring. Almost. The tapping never stopped completely, but it became polite. A soft double knock on the wall at 0300 exactly. Never more, never less. Like something checking that we were still breathing. We stopped jumping at it after the first week. We even started answering in low voices. Yeah, we're still here. The knocks always answered with one more soft tap, then silence until the next night. We kept the floods burning 24 hours a day. Fuel deliveries arrived by helicopter every 10 days like clockwork. Command wanted the site lit up like a Christmas tree until the very end. We didn't argue. Then the contractors were delayed. A massive, low-pressure system rolled in from the Barents Sea on day 26. Winds gusting 110 knots. Visibility 0. Aviation grounded for at least 72 hours, probably longer. We received the message at 14:30 on April 24th. Contractor insertion. Postponed minimum 96 hours due. Met conditions. Maintain security. Fuel resupply also delayed. Conserve power where possible. We looked at each other across the galley table. We had enough diesel for 17 days at full load. 22 if we went to minimal lighting and killed the outer floods. We killed the outer floods that same night. That was the mistake. The moment the perimeter went dark, the atmosphere changed. Not dramatically at first, just heavier. The air inside the barracks grew colder, even though the heaters were still running. Our breath fogged in thin white plumes, even in the bunk rooms. At 02:17, the knocks came again. But they weren't polite anymore. 3 hard, fast bangs, then silence, then 3 more, like someone trying to get our attention very badly. We went to full battle rattle, weapons hot, lights on maximum inside. We gathered in the main corridor, back to back, I covering every angle. Then the red light started. Not the emergency strips. Every single bulb in the building, incandescent, fluorescent, LED, began to shift toward crimson. Slowly at first, then faster. Within 90 seconds, the entire barracks was bathed in deep, bloody red. Shadows stretched wrong. Faces looked like masks. And the shapes were inside. Not at the windows, not outside the fence, inside the building. We saw them in the corners of vision first, tall, narrow smears of darkness that shouldn't have existed in the middle of a lit corridor. When we turned to face them directly, they disappeared. When we looked away, they were closer. One of them stood at the far end of the hallway, motionless, head tilted. No face, just a smooth oval of nothing. It raised that too long arm and pointed straight at the door of the old ops room. Kovacs here. I'm the one who went. I told the others to stay in the corridor, weapons on the shape. I moved down the hallway alone, rifle up, tack light off. The red glow was enough. Every step felt like walking through cold motor oil. I reached the ops room door. It was already open. I hadn't touched it. Inside, the old troposcatter console was lit up again. Green phosphor glow, no power connected, no tubes warm. Yet the scope was alive. A single contact, dead center, directly under the building. The needle didn't waver. It simply sat there. Then the scope began to write words. Not code, not static. Actual letters. One at a time. Very slow. VIVERENONPOSSUNT. They live they cannot. Latin. Old military Latin. The kind carved on Cold War plaques. Another line appeared beneath it. NOSSEMPERHICSUMUS. We are always here. The console whined, high-pitched, like a dying transformer, and went dark. Behind me, the shape that had pointed was now standing in the doorway, closer than it had any right to be. I raised the rifle, safety off. Finger on the trigger, it didn't move, it simply waited. Then the voice came, not loud, not threatening, almost gentle. Gyertek, ma varunk. Hungarian. Come, we are already waiting. My blood turned to ice water. I backed out slowly. The shape didn't follow. When I reached the corridor, the others were frozen, weapons up, staring past me. Every window in the building showed the same thing. Silhouettes, standing shoulder to shoulder, filling every pane, too many to count, and all of them looking straight at us. We didn't sleep the rest of that night. We didn't speak. We simply waited in the red light, rifles ready, listening to the slow, patient knocking that now came from every wall at once. Like applause. like welcome, like the mountain saying, "You stayed, now you belong to us." The contractors never made it in. The storm lasted 9 days. When the weather finally cleared, a quick reaction force found the barracks empty, weapons neatly stacked, sleeping bags unzipped, coffee mugs still warm on the table. Just like 1971. Only one difference. On the ops room console, still dark, still dead, someone had scratched 4 words into the metal with a combat knife, deep enough to take the finish off. Sver non possunt, Chapter 7. Echoes in the Aftermath. Captain Victor Lindstrom, Norwegian Army Intelligence Liaison, Arctic Command. I never set foot inside Echo 7 while it was active. My role began after the final detachment vanished. On May 7th, 2025, a Norwegian Quick Reaction Force, 2 platoons from the Finnmark Land Command, landed by Sea King helicopter under clearing skies. They found exactly what the 1971 relief team had found. Barracks empty, weapons racked in perfect alignment, personal effects undisturbed, coffee still warm in mugs on the galley table, 4 sleeping bags unzipped as though the occupants had risen in unison and walked out. No blood, no signs of violence, no tracks leading away from the buildings in any direction. The only anomaly was inside the old ops room. The troposcatter console, long since disconnected, bore fresh scratches in the metal fascia. Deep, deliberate letters carved with what forensic analysis later confirmed was a standard-issue Norwegian combat knife. Vivere non possunt nos semper, hic sumus. They cannot live. We are always here. The words were in Latin, consistent with Cold War-era NATO plaques, and mottos still found on decommissioned sites across the Alliance. But the carving was new, metal shavings still present on the console deck when the QRF arrived. The detachment's own knives were accounted for. None matched the edge profile of the scratches. Whoever or whatever made the inscription had used a blade that wasn't there. We classified the entire incident within 48 hours. Official after-action summary. Environmental factors and structural deterioration led to voluntary site abandonment. Personnel accounted for via medical/psychiatric channels. A fiction. Of course. The 4 men were never found. No bodies, no distress beacons, no satellite imagery of movement in the exclusion zone. They simply ceased to exist on the mountain. I was assigned to review every piece of recovered material, body cam footage, audio logs, still photographs, the declassified 1971 files cross-referenced with the 2025 detachment reports. Patterns emerged quickly. Auditory phenomena, footsteps, tapping, voices, escalated in frequency and clarity with each successive rotation. Visual contacts, heat signatures without tracks, elongated shadows without thermal signature, followed the same progression. Power failures, door anomalies, and the recurring red illumination appeared only after prolonged exposure. The shapes never attacked directly. They observed, they waited, they imitated. The most disturbing element was the language shift. Early contacts used Norwegian. Later ones incorporated English fragments, then Latin, then, on the final night, Hungarian, matching the native tongue of the last soldier on site. Whatever inhabited Echo 7 adapted. It learned. It spoke in the voices most likely to be understood, most likely to unnerve. I interviewed the survivors from earlier rotations under non-disclosure. Sergeant Hagen described the initial tapping as patient, like someone counting heartbeats. Private Cortez recalled the voice outside her door as calm, almost advisory. "You shouldn't be here." Corporal Reynolds spoke of the faceless shapes dissolving like smoke, yet leaving a smell of warm decay that lingered in his gear for weeks. Lieutenant Sorensen showed me the brass key found on her pillow, still in evident storage, still fitting no lock on the site. Every witness used the same phrase when pressed. It was waiting. Not aggressive, not malevolent in the conventional sense, simply patient, as though the mountain, or whatever had claimed it, had all the time in the world. In November 2025, 6 months after the final disappearance, a classified drone survey was authorized. High-altitude RQ-4, global Hawk overflight, thermal and multispectral imaging. The barracks block appeared normal on visible light. On infrared, however, every window showed a uniform heat signature, body temperature, human range, despite ambient -40 Celsius. Dozens of stationary forms, shoulder to shoulder, filling every pane. The shapes did not move when the drone passed overhead. They simply faced upward, as though watching the camera stare back. The feed was cut after 90 seconds. Analysts reported intermittent interference, static bursts carrying layered voices, too faint to translate, but matching the cadence of the final radio transmission from April 15th. Echo 7 remains on the books as permanently mothballed due to an environmental hazard. No further security details, no reclamation. The Norwegian government quietly removed it from public maps. Satellite imagery is scrubbed or downgraded. Officially, nothing happened there worth remembering. Unofficially, old signals veterans still talk. They say the troposcatter dishes were never just antennas. They were ears, listening not only to encrypted Allied traffic, but to something else carried on the upper atmosphere, something that learned to answer back. I keep the photographs on a secure drive, the scratched console, the red-lit windows, the empty bunks. Sometimes, late at night, in my office at Raytan, I play the audio clips again. The tapping, the footsteps, the voice saying in perfect Hungarian, "Come, we are already waiting." I don't know what took those men. I don't know if they're dead, or if something worse happened, if parts of them are still there, wearing the shapes we saw, speaking the languages we taught them. But I know this. The mountain didn't forget 1971. It remembered every detail, every face, every voice. And when we sent new soldiers to guard an empty station, it simply opened its doors wider. It welcomed them home. If you ever find yourself posted to one of those old Cold War relics, some forgotten radar dome, some rusting troposcatter link high above the tree line, remember the men of Echo 7. Keep the lights on, and when the tapping starts, don't answer, because something out there is still counting, still waiting, and it has all the time in the world.